Thank you very much, Alison. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? Back there, great. So as Alison introduced me, I'm Tammy, and today my colleague Sarah and I are going to be talking to you about sharks and people. I'm focusing on shark and human conflict and how this has been dealt with around the world in the past, currently, and for future directions. So beaches around the world have become tourist hotspots and vacation destinations for millions of people. And of course, Cape Town's no exception to this. We have some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and people come from all around to enjoy these beaches and take part in recreational activities such as surfing. And of course, with beach tourism, it becomes a very important part of our economy, and a lot of revenue is generated through tourism. So therefore, around the world, beaches are marketed as these idyllic holiday destinations. And while they are, what happens is that beaches are seen as recreational spaces, and they become separated from the reality of what the ocean actually is. And this is a quote by an Australian researcher who deals with a lot of the human dimension of conflicts such as shark attacks. And what he said is, simply put, the beach has been domesticated as a tourist location for bathers in ways that do not conform to the reality of what the ocean is, which is the wild. We forget that when we step into the ocean, we're stepping into a wild ecosystem. It's basically the equivalent of stepping out of your game vehicle in the middle of the Kruger National Park. However, many people don't see it this way. And of course, if you step into any wild ecosystem, there are going to be predators. Now, although the iconic white shark is probably the most notorious of the marine shark predators, there are a number of sharks that are actually responsible for shark attacks around the world. They're known as the big three, and it's the great white shark, the tiger shark, and the bull shark. And not only are these among some of the largest and most aggressive shark species, they also basically have a distribution that matches ours in terms of coastal use. So they love warm coastal water just as much as we do. And if you look at shark attack patterns around the world, what we can see is areas that are really popular tourist destinations in these sort of tropical and temperate areas that also overlap with the distribution of these large shark species are the hotspots where shark attacks occur. And of course, humans love to proliferate, and over the past 50 years, there's been a steady increase in the number of people in the world. So with that comes more people in coastal areas, more people sharing space with these apex predators. And the result of that has been a slow increase in the number of fatal shark attacks around the world. And if you look here, this shows, the blue bars show the number of shark attacks from 1900s to 2009. And you can see over the last 50 years, there's been a steady increase in the number of unprovoked shark attacks. But what's really important about this graph as well is the red line, which shows the percentage of these shark attacks that are actually fatal. And you can see that from the beginning of the 1900s to now, there's been a steady decline in the number of fatal attacks. And it actually went from about 50% in 1900 to less than 10% now. And in fact, globally, only 6 people on average are killed by sharks in fatal shark attacks around the world. And to put this in perspective, some other culprits of death: coconuts kill 150 people annually. Champagne corks kill an average of 24 people annually, and your cute and cuddly but somewhat sinister species like cows kill up to 20 people annually. So shark attacks are really rare, and they really are not common events at all. However, there seems to be this massive overreaction to shark attacks, and although they are traumatic events, the reaction is so much more than would be expected for something that is so rare. And the reason behind this goes back to what I said about people not understanding the reality of the ocean and not seeing it as a wild environment. And of course, the media loves to jump on board and use sensationalist headlines and start spreading misinformation about man-eaters and rogue sharks, and we all start hearing the Jaws music playing in the back of our minds. But compounded with this is the fact that we know so little about sharks, particularly historically, but even today, there's so much we don't understand about shark movement patterns, why they use these coastal areas, and how their behavior changes in response to 101 different environmental and biological variables. So the technology we use to track sharks and understand their movements has only really been developed in the past sort of 20 years, which means that when these things happen and people are panicking and the media's on the rampage about it and people turn to scientists, a lot of the time we don't have all of the answers. And this causes more fear and more panic, and of course the economy suffers, and local governments start getting pressured to take action. And the problem with dealing with shark conflict and trying to resolve it is that there's not always a one-size-fits-all solution. So we're very lucky in Cape Town how we have natural elevation over popular beaches, which means we can use shark spotters to resolve our conflict. But in many areas of the world, they don't have such easy and clear solutions. And what happens is that governments get driven into a corner and make knee-jerk sort of reactions. And there's a history of very poor management when it comes to dealing with shark conflicts. Either unsustainable things like permanent beach closures, or lethal methods such as shark hunts and short-term culls or long-term shark culls. So I'm just going to look a bit more into each of these classic examples of shark management around the world, the history of them, and a couple of case studies for why these are not sustainable and the impacts they've had. So the first is permanent beach closures. So a classic example of this is Reunion Island. It's currently one of the shark attack capitals of the world. They had a spate of shark attacks in 2011 and between 2011 and 2013. There were 12 attacks, of which 5 were fatal. And of course, it was widespread panic, and the government were forced to make a decision. And they decided to close all of the beaches around the island and ban swimming and surfing completely. Now, I don't know if any of you are surfers or know surfers, but if you tell a surfer that they cannot surf indefinitely, it's not going to go down too well. So what happened was that people started cheating the system and surfing anyway. And the system proved to be completely ineffective. And by 2017, instead of 12 attacks and 5 fatalities, it was up to 20 attacks, of which 8 had been fatal. So these massive beach closures, especially somewhere like Reunion, which is a surfer's paradise and an island, just aren't sustainable. Then if we look at shark hunts, a classic example of this is Western Australia. This was very well publicized, was a very controversial shark cull that took place in 2014. Again, there was a spate of attacks, an unexplained increase in the number of shark attacks. There were 19 attacks between 2011 and 2013, of which 6 were fatal. And again, the government tried to make a decision, and in this case, their method was to look at those shark species that were responsible, so your big 3, the white shark, bull shark, and tiger shark, and specifically target those large sharks with the aim of reducing or killing any shark that potentially was a hazard in popular beach areas. So what they did was use a method known as a drumline, which is basically a baited hook that is suspended from a float. And these were deployed over the summer period in early 2014 off all of the popular recreational beaches in Western Australia. And the aim was that any shark that was caught, a tiger, bull, or white shark that was caught that was over 3 meters, was killed, and the smaller ones were released. However, this was only deployed for 1 season, and then the Environmental Protection Agency of Australia declared it unsustainable because it had a massive impact on local shark species, and also there was no scientific evidence that it actually prevented attacks. And then thirdly, we have long-term shark culls. So this is a little bit closer to home. Currently in KwaZulu-Natal, there is a long-term shark culling program in action, and it's one of 3. The other 2 are in Queensland and New South Wales in Australia. And these long-term shark culls are still going on today. In KwaZulu-Natal, the cull started in 1957 after what was known as Black December, where there were 9 attacks in 5 months, of which 6 were fatal. And in response, the government deployed these shark nets off most of the popular beaches in Durban and along the east coast. And the way these work is that it's not a solid barrier, it's basically a fishing device. And off popular beaches, they have a staggered pattern of these shark nets. And the aim is to capture and kill as many sharks as possible in order to reduce the local population and therefore reduce attacks. And the one thing about shark nets is that they are effective. They do reduce the populations of sharks massively. And since these have been deployed in Durban along the east coast, there's only been 1 fatal attack since 1950. However, they come at a massive cost to the environment. So not only do they capture and kill large, important apex predators, they also catch a number of harmless shark species, as well as fish, dolphins, turtles, and rays. So there's been a lot of public pressure for the KwaZulu-Natal Sharks Board to actually mitigate this environmental impact. So in response, they've now mixed the system where they use nets and these drum lines. So instead of having a staggered pattern where they used to have 3 nets, now they take out the nets on either side and replace them with drum lines. And the aim of this is to reduce the bycatch but then increased targeting of these large shark species such as white sharks, bull sharks, and tiger sharks. And this is quite dramatically bad for the environment because sharks are already under so much pressure from things such as the shark fin trade. They're also captured for their meat and sold in many countries as food, and up to 100 million sharks are killed per year. And this has really terrible impacts for the environment. So sharks play an incredibly important role as apex predators, and they sit at the top of the food web, and using a force known as top-down control, they regulate the abundance and the behavior of prey species. And this creates a very structured, stable system, and ecosystems that have high numbers of sharks have been shown to have good biodiversity, be very healthy, and be very stable. What happens if you decrease the number of sharks is that this whole system starts to break down, and you see things like loss of stability, loss of biodiversity, and the destruction of fragile habitats such as coral reefs. Luckily, research is slowly growing, and we have a solid foundation now of research that shows the importance of white sharks and of all sharks in ecosystems, and how detrimental it is when these sharks are removed from ecosystems. So the word is slowly being spread about how important it is to conserve sharks and how important it is to find alternatives to these lethal methods. And there's a lot of public support that has been gained for these non-lethal mitigation strategies and calls to remove these lethal programs. And in all of the areas where these lethal programs are currently still in operation, there's been huge pressure on government to seek alternatives, which has driven research into new novel technologies that promote coexistence among sharks and people. And I will let Sarah tell you more about those.
Thank you. Oh, why? What's wrong with that? Oh, okay. Must I take it off now? Oh, God, I just put it back on. Sorry. Okay. Oh, that's not on. Can you hear me? I can just shout otherwise. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. As Tammy explained, sharks are very important for the ecosystem, and the way that we have traditionally managed them has not sort of borne that in mind. And so we've had lots of lethal, environmentally destructive ways of managing sharks, and we have to look for new ways in the future that balance the needs of sharks, that realize that sharks are important for healthy oceans, but also realize that it's not as easy as to just say that we're getting out of our car in Kruger National Park. People want to use the ocean. They have a right to use the ocean. We've got 4 million people here in Cape Town who all live within 30 kilometers of the coast. And at the same time, we also have the second largest aggregation of white sharks in the world. So we need to find ways that people can coexist with sharks and going forwards. And thankfully, there's been quite a bit of investigation into this all around the world. Luckily, people have begun to realize the negative impacts of the culling programs and also the inefficiencies of the short-term culls. And so people are looking at new ways. And so that's what I want to tell you all about, is like what people are doing all around the world to reduce shark bites. So we're looking at sustainable shark bite mitigation measures, really people that are no longer introducing lethal culling methods around the world. And there's two different ways to look at how you're going to stay safe from shark bites. The first way is to look at beach-wide safety measures, things that are going to protect a large number of people, and this is normally what we expect governments to implement. And there you can either have detection programs which are looking for sharks, or you can have also deterrent programs which are trying to get rid of sharks. So this is generally when there is a number of shark bite incidents, people turn around and they look to government and say, what are you going to do to keep us safe? And you have to hope, fingers crossed, that the government's going to do something that is going to keep you safe, but also keep our oceans safe. Oh, there you go. Oopsie. And then the second thing which we'll just look at is personal protection measures, things that people can do for themselves, and devices that have been developed for individuals to keep them safe. I'm not very good at poking the thing. There you go. So, to start off, I thought I would tell you about Shark Spotters, because obviously that's what's here in Cape Town, and this has been proven to be a very effective sustainable beach safety program that we have. Shark Spotters, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the program, but essentially it works on continuous visual surveillance by trained observers. So we have spotters who sit up on the mountain from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, and they look for sharks. They're trained to detect sharks. They use polarized sunglasses and binoculars. They look for sharks. If they see a shark come close to the beach, then they call people out of the water, let the shark go past, and then let the people go back in afterwards. Oh, what is going on? So the idea of Shark Spotters is that it reduces the spatial overlap between people and sharks. So in Cape Town during the spring and summertime, we have a lot of people going to the beach, but it's also the time when we see the most white sharks come close inshore as well, as they follow the fish species, yellowtail, that come inshore as well. So with Shark Spotters, by removing the people out of the way, we're reducing the spatial overlap between people and sharks, and so reducing the risk of encountering a shark and the risk of a shark bite. The program also works with a flag system. When you get to the beach on the day, you'll see what flag is flying on the beach, you'll understand what the spotting conditions are, if there's been a lot of shark activity recently. And so the whole program actually really works not around sharks, but around people. We're trying to move people out of the way, get people to listen to us so that the sharks can carry on doing what they're supposed to do every day. Am I just pointing it in the wrong direction? There you go. So the important thing about Shark Spotters, it's been operating now for 14 years, since 2004. We've recorded over 2,200 shark sightings on our beaches, and about 60% of those result in beach closures where we actively call people out of the water. So it has been very successful, but the main success around Shark Spotters is the way that it's a very holistic approach to shark safety. So it is not just about the spotters on the mountain keeping the people safe, or the exclusion barrier, which I'll tell you about in a minute, but it also combines research and education. So the idea with the research program that Tammy runs is, aside from learning lots about wonderful biology and behavioral ecology of sharks for conservation status, it's also important to understand for people and safety, what are the sharks doing? What time of year do we expect to see them? What factors increase their presence inshore? And that way we can feed that into safety and say, okay, so when must we be more alert for sharks? When must we warn people more about the shark activity? And then also education. Our colleague Nicole is here who runs the education for Shark Spotters. And it's really trying to tell people what you can do so that people understand how they can reduce their shark risk. And again, we'll speak a bit more about that later. But the idea is just a very holistic approach that doesn't focus on just one aspect. And in a sense, we're quite unique around the world, and the only organization that really combines safety, education, and research effectively to keep beaches safer. So, around the world, so Cape Town is very successful. We've been managing it quite well for 14 years, but around the world, people have also been doing other things to manage shark bites with varying degrees of success. So in Australia, and this is around the whole coastline of Australia, they've been using aerial patrols for a number of years. And the aerial patrols have really great public support. People love the aerial patrols. So a helicopter or a fixed-wing plane flies over the beach and looks for a shark. Sounds very similar to shark spotting. And then it flies away, and then there's nobody looking for sharks anymore on the beach. So while aerial patrols are great to give you an idea of levels of shark activity, in terms of shark safety, they're actually kind of not very helpful. I like to use the analogy of CCTV. So you wouldn't turn your CCTV on at home for 5 minutes a day and go like, great, we're covered, no one's going to break in because the CCTV is on for 5 minutes, and then you turn it off and carry on. It's the same principle with a aerial patrol. Once the plane has flown past the beach, it doesn't provide any safety anymore. On top of that, A study done in 2013 looked at the spotting rates of the aerial patrols to see how well they could pick up sharks. So they put down some fake shark shapes along the ocean floor where they knew exactly where it was, and they took people across in aeroplanes and in helicopters, trained spotters that they had, and they asked them, they worked out what percentage of the sharks were they actually picking up. And for fixed-wing aircraft, it was 12% of the shark shapes that they'd put down, and for the helicopters, it was 17%. So not only do they only provide protection for 5 minutes a day, they're also not guaranteed to pick up the shark anyway. So despite all of this, and it being well publicised, they still have huge public support in Australia. They spend millions of dollars every year on aerial patrols, despite the fact that they know that they're not very effective. Australians, what can you say? What they have started doing is they're trying to replace that. Obviously, they're very expensive as well. You've got to have pilots and fuel and planes and everything. They've started replacing them or trying to incorporate drones into that. We've also started using drones for some of our work at Shark Spotters. With the drones, obviously, you can hover over the beach for a longer period of time. You're closer in. They've been doing more studies. They haven't published anything yet, but apparently the detection rates are much higher, around about 80% with the drones. So that's very good. But with drones, you still have the limitations of battery life. The drones that we use only last for 15 minutes, so we can only spot for 15 minutes, and you've got to bring the drone back down, change the battery, go up again. Batteries are expensive. In South Africa, you have to have licensed drone operators, and it takes forever, and it's horribly expensive to get your license, your remote pilot's license. Also, I don't know if anybody's ever tried to put a drone up in a southeaster, but it's not hugely, it's not very easy. So aerial patrols are used around the world, but they're definitely not the most effective measure, but they are sustainable, they are not having an environmental impact. In Australia, there is an organisation or a company they're actually called Optus, and they've developed this Clever Boy. So it uses sonar to try and detect sharks. So this is still very much in its early stages. These are all very interesting. I love this. I love seeing all these new technologies, but when you start digging into them, you're always like, I don't know how that would work. So with the sonar, their plan is to put buoys along the ocean, along the beach, and the sonar would detect the sharks. But the sonar, and it's kind of the same as a fish finder, so it would send out its sonic waves or whatever, I can't think what sonar does, yeah. And then it would come up with a shark, it would show you a shape. Unfortunately, at the moment, the technology doesn't seem far enough advanced to be able to distinguish between different shapes. They can only detect at quite a short distance. And the problems that they have is that sonar is only, it's not very good in a very noisy environment. So in a surf zone where there's a lot of waves, a lot of oxygen in the water moving, it's not very effective. But they are developing it further, and it has been trialled in a number of places, including in Jeffreys Bay in South Africa for the J-Bay Open, not last year, the year before. They brought over a Clever Boy system to see if they could detect sharks. We didn't see the results of that, unfortunately. But they didn't come back the next year, so I'm guessing it was not that effective. Then another system that's been in place around the world for a very long time and has worked quite effectively is exclusion barriers. Now, these are completely different to the shark nets that we have. Exclusion barriers, and we get many different formats and configurations around the world, but the idea is that they form a complete barrier between sharks and people. So they go from the sea surface to the sea floor, and they prevent sharks from getting into an area. So essentially like a fence that stops sharks entering. With the shark nets that we have in Durban and in Queensland and New South Wales, the sharks can swim underneath them, they can swim around them. The exclusion barriers generally have very small mesh size, so sharks, the idea is not that they're stuck, just that they're prevented from entering. So exclusion barriers, actually, they were first used in Australia and they called them stinger nets to stop the jellyfish coming close inshore. And then they've been used around the world. Hong Kong, Reunion has tried to use them, we'll speak about in a second. Australia has used them a lot. They've even put one in Thailand now. They had a shark bite in Hua Hin in Thailand, and they've put a shark exclusion barrier in. So they're used quite a lot around the world. As I said, lots of different configurations. We in Fish-Hook have an exclusion barrier that we have put in that is completely different from other barriers. So most of the barriers around the world, well, all of them, they put them in and they stay in for long periods of time. And they have to withstand all the environmental conditions that come at them. In Fish-Hook, we've designed an exclusion barrier that we deploy and retrieve daily. And there's two main reasons for that. Firstly, is to stop any entanglements of whales and dolphins and other animals overnight, and then during the day we have somebody monitoring the net to make sure no animals approach, but at night they wouldn't be able to see the net. And then also if the environmental conditions are bad, if there's a lot of wind or a lot of swell, we just don't put the net out. So one of the issues people have around the world is they have these exclusion barriers and they put them out and they have a big cyclone come through and it just completely trashes the barrier. And then one, it costs you a lot of money, and two, it is then not an effective shark safety measure. And in fact, they had an issue in Reunion 2 years ago where they had a storm come through, it tore a hole in the exclusion barrier. They knew about it, they'd put a sign up, but people hadn't really read the sign, and a guy went in and lost an arm and a leg to a shark inside the exclusion net. So they really have to work very well. So we've had this unique system here in Fish-Hook, which has worked very well, and it's also very cost effective. It costs us about 350,000 rand a year to run it. It employs 10 people, and we don't ever have to. I think we've been running now 6 years, and we've replaced half the net. So whereas if we'd have had it in permanently, we would have had to keep replacing it. A new system, and if you've been in Cape Town for a few years, you might have heard about 2 years ago, is the electronic repellent cable. So the KZN Sharks Board, who put in the shark nets and drum lines in Durban, they are desperately looking, they realise the environmental impact that their safety gear has, and they have been looking for new technologies to try and replace it so that they don't have that environmental impact. And they've been developing an electronic cable that basically go in the ocean, and it interferes with the shark's ampullae of Lorenzini, which are the electroreceptors on the shark. And basically the idea with it is it would overstimulate the shark. So it's kind of like shining a torch in your eyes and you, oh, it's horrible, and you veer away. Thank you. It's a brilliant concept. They've pumped a lot of money into it for a number of years and is still not yet at a marketable product or something that they can implement on their beaches. It's not just from a shark perspective, you've also got to have something that can withstand the huge seas in KZN. So it's definitely very promising, and the guys who are working on it are doing a really great job. It's a long, long time coming. I think they're hoping now to go over to Australia or to Reunion to go and test it over there. Need some more funding for it. But it's definitely something that's very positive, and it's optimistic that it could replace the shark nets in Durban. So then the last beach-wide measure, and I don't know, you guys have to decide whether you think this is sustainable or not. It's a bit of a interesting one. So the traditional drum lines, which Tammy showed us, which are the big hooks with a piece of fish on the end that attract sharks and then kill the sharks, those are being replaced around the world with smart drumlines. So the problem with the original drumlines was that the shark would get caught, and then in a week's time or a few days' time, somebody would come and take the dead shark off, or whatever else. I've seen pictures of dolphins and turtles both stuck on drumlines, so they don't stop bycatch completely. But the shark, until the operator came around to clear all the nets, the shark would stay there, which in itself could be considered something that was attracting other animals to the beach. But also it meant that the mortality was very high, because it's unlikely that anything's going to last on a drumline for days at a time. So now Reunion actually invented these smart drumlines. So it's like a normal drumline, but then it's got a movement sensor on it, a triggering magnet. And when a shark or animal gets caught on it, it sends an SMS to the operator who's in charge of it and says, you need to come and rescue this animal now. So they then get the animals, and they, depending on where you are, they do different things with them. So in some areas, if it's a large shark over 3 meters, then they will just kill the shark. In other areas, they'll tow the shark offshore. But then there's interesting implications there for if you're towing the animal offshore, what are you then doing? So the shark was at the beach for a reason. You've now moved it. Where's it going to go? It's probably going to go back to a beach. Are you just moving the problem to a different beach? And also, what kind of impact are you having if you're moving sharks that need to be in these coastal areas and now you're moving them 5-10 kilometers offshore? So it's kind of punted as a green, sustainable system, but I'm not entirely convinced. And then just to go on to personal shark protection devices, so things that we can do, that we can buy for ourselves. There's a lot of them out there. A lot of them are just as effective as a wooden spoon. And they have, as they say, the latest in shark repellent technology, the wooden spoon, proven to be as effective as any other untested repellent on the market. So with personal shark repellents, basically, so with beach-wide shark deterrents, shark mitigation measures, they're put in by governments. There's a lot of testing that goes in to see if they're effective. If they're not effective, they don't carry on pumping money into them. There's quite a lot of thought and sort of follow through that goes into it. You don't need that when you're selling to the public, because we all know the public doesn't know what they're talking about. So, and this is the theory, is that you can basically sell anything as a shark repellent, and people really do. The majority of them are not tested, and in fact, until this last year, only one shark repellent had ever been proven to be effective at repelling sharks, but now it's up to 2. But you can have anything. So you can have stripy wetsuits, you can have camouflaged wetsuits, you can have wrists with magnets in them, you can have speakers that play heavy metal music, you can have things that you put on your surfboard leashes with magnets in them, you can have surf wax with chili in it, and this actually has been marketed as a shark repellent product. You can have a spray can like Batman, so if you see a shark, you can spray, and I am not joking, these are all, you can go and you can buy them in South Africa, a lot of them on Muizenberg beachfront. There's a million things which you can do to try and keep sharks away. Very few of them have been tested, and of those that have been tested, like seriously very few of them have actually been proven to have any effect. The one thing that a lot of people ask about is the stripy wetsuits or the camouflage wetsuits. The principle around the stripy wetsuits is that you are supposed to look like what? You're supposed to look like a sea snake. So the idea is that it is you look unpalatable to a shark because you look like a sea snake, which are venomous, which is important. So sea snakes are not poisonous. If you eat a sea snake, it doesn't mean that you're going to die. They are venomous, so they bite you and inject venom. So that whole theory about looking like a sea snake because you wouldn't want to eat it doesn't actually work anyway, because eating a sea snake wouldn't do it. If the sea snake bites you, then you would be injured. But also, you're talking about sharks that have seen sea snakes before. So we don't have sea snakes. Well, we do have some sea snakes here. Don't we? Not the stripy black and white kind of sea snake. And also great white sharks, they don't regularly try to eat sea snakes, they're not scared of them. So a lot of it is taken ideas, which is then how they can convince people that it works. Because it takes an idea and you're like, yeah, that does sound like a good idea, that must work. But actually it really doesn't work. And the same with the cryptic sort of looking wetsuits. The idea is so that the shark can't see you very well. So you're camouflaged. But the thing particularly about white sharks, is that firstly, they can see contrast very well. So that in itself means that you don't want to be wearing a stripy wetsuit because they can see that very well. But so they don't see color very well, according to all the studies, but they see contrast very well. And the reason why they see that is because when they're on the sea floor and they're looking up for their prey species, they look for the silhouette against the sunlight behind it. So even if you have a beautifully camouflaged wetsuit, you're still creating a very definitive silhouette against the sunlight above you. So it's not hugely effective. But new research has been done into looking at illuminating wetsuits to try and get rid of that contrast and that silhouette. So they did some stuff in Mossel Bay. I haven't seen anything published yet, but apparently they had flashing lights on the wetsuits, and those worked quite well. So it still needs to be published and for it to be seen, but that apparently was quite promising, which is interesting. Just to very quickly, I'm about to run out of time, just very quickly go through, this last year, there was a study at Flinders University in Australia that was done by Charlie Huveniers, and they were like, oh my gosh, there's so many crazy things on the market. A lot of them have got quite a lot of traction and lots of celebrity endorsements. We're going to look at them and see how effective they are with white sharks. So I won't go through everything, but they basically looked at 2 things which fit on surfboards. So they only looked at devices for surfers. They looked at 2 things that fit on surfboards. So one that built into the surfboard, the R-Peller, and the other one was the Freedom Plus Surf. And they work on the electro-receptors of the shark to try and disturb them. They looked at the Shark Bands bracelet, which is a bracelet with magnets in it, and then also at the Shark Bands surf leash, which has a leash which has magnets. And then they looked at the Chillax wax, which is a combination of eucalyptus, chili, cloves, cayenne pepper, neem, tea tree oil, citronella, and beeswax. And the idea is that it masks the odor of the surfer by overwhelming the shark's olfactory organs with an odor very different from that of their natural prey. So, basically what they did was they put, almost like a surfboard, they basically a big plank, and they put all 5 deterrents on there, but so it would be 1 active deterrent and 4 passive ones that weren't turned on or weren't working. With the Chillax wax, they just used normal surf wax for that. They put a tuna head at the bottom, and then they saw how effective they were at deterring sharks. And so they measured how often the shark came to the bait, how long it took the shark to take the bait, how many sort of circles around the bait it did, at what distance did it show that it was like uncomfortable coming close. And the results were, so a tick means it was effective, and a cross means it had absolutely no effect on deterring sharks. So there was 1. So the only measure that was seen to actually have any effect was the Freedom Plus Surf. Now, interestingly, a few years ago, Shark Spotters with Alison was involved in testing the Shark Shield, which is one that's designed for divers and things that you put on your ankle. And that also was shown to have as an effect, but it doesn't show that they're 100% effective. So the Freedom Surf reduced the time that it took the shark to take the bait and reduced the number of baits by 60%, but that still meant that 40% of the time the sharks were not affected by the repellent at all. So it really means that there are things out there that do work, but you need to, particularly the Shark Bands, but those have been really, really marketed very strongly. They've got a lot of celebrity endorsements, and all these people have these stories of how the Shark Bands has worked with the magnetic stuff inside it, and really they were shown not to have any effect. One caveat that the scientists said was they weren't shown to have any effect in it was sort of 100 or something odd trials that we did. Perhaps if we did more trials, they might have shown an effect. But, after 100 sharks coming up, I think you want it to be more effective than that. You would hope. So the important thing when people are looking for a shark deterrent, a personal shark deterrent, because they do cost a lot of money. This Freedom Surf Plus is $500, so what's that now? It's like 8,000 rand. Is to make sure, don't just trust the website of the thing, which is going to tell you that it works, and it's going to tell you that Kelly Slater says it works and all these other people. Actually try and find out if there is scientific evidence that proves that it does. Oh, this is the one that they have for divers. And so it also, with the research that we did for divers, they found that the sharks, there was basically 2 experiments. In Australia, they looked at static baits that were just there, and whether the shark would come near the shark shield with that. And in South Africa, we looked at when it was being towed on a decoy. And we found that when the shark shield was turned on and it was being towed by a decoy, it didn't have any sharks come and attack the decoy like they would do a seal. But when it was around the static baits, it showed that it took the shark longer to come to the bait, but it did still come there. So the Shark Shield, which is this, and the Freedom Plus, they're both made by the same company, are the only 2 effective ones. The important thing to remember is that the R-Peller also works on electronic, the idea of overwhelming the electronic sensors of the shark, but it didn't work. So it shows that it's not just electricity that makes a difference. It actually has to be a certain configuration, and so each individual item in each individual product has to be tested. So the most effective thing that anybody can do to reduce their risk of encountering a shark is actually to be shark smart. And there's been a big move around the world for people to start thinking about shark safety, start changing your own behavior to improve your safety at the beach. And there's a number of different tips, and most of them are relevant across the world. Things like if you see diving birds and bait fish, sharks may be present, leave the water, swim between the flags, do swim in groups, do swim close to shore, use a personal shark shield or a repellent device, don't swim in murky waters. And then this is on the left is the South African, on the right is the Australian. This is the one from Cape Cod. Please note that we started using Be Shark Smart before anybody else. But essentially it's just the same, it's the same message, and really people need to change their own behavior and think about it. Think if you're going to a beach that has safety measures in place, are they sustainable safety measures? And just think before you get to the beach about shark safety. That's it. I've spoken quite a bit. I can try.
Okay. Questions for Tammy and Sarah?
Well, anytime you get an ocean, it's your own risk all the time. Sharks putting flags that say black flag or green flag is trying to give you an idea of the factors affecting the spotting ability. So unfortunately, we never really have crystal clear waters here, so we very rarely fly the green flag. It's mostly the black flag. But I think 85% of our shark sightings are on a black flag. So it doesn't mean that we can't see anything. It's harder to see than if it was crystal clear perfect conditions.
Is it safer to swim in groups than to swim singly?
There's two reasons. One is that in a group you could potentially be the shark may be more wary of a group of people than one person on their own who's quite vulnerable. But also, if you swim in a group and something happens, there's other people around you to help you. If you go swimming on your own, then there's no one who might also see the shark before it comes close to you. There's no one who could help you if the shark does come and attack you. So there's a couple of reasons, but it's always a good idea.
What's the ratio of the people taken by sharks between surfers and just...
The majority are surfers, mostly because they are much further out and they spend a lot longer in the water. So most of them are surfers, and then it's, I think, scuba divers, and then there's, I can't remember figures, bathers and then scuba divers. But yes, so mostly surfers because they've got wetsuits, they're spending a long time in the water, and they're also surfing in riskier areas. Kind of. So at JBay, basically only for the contest. So the year after that, they had the Clever Boy sonar. We don't really know what the results of that were, but if they didn't bring them back the next year, I'm guessing it wasn't great. And they've got a lot of drones out there now. So you'll see last year they had stopped the competition for like half a day because they followed a quite a big white shark with the drones. Drones out there. You didn't have good elevation. And so the water's quite murky there, so. So that applies more to the bull sharks in that, or sharks in that area that are feeding at that time at dawn or dusk. So in Cape Town, we don't really use that as a safety tip because we see most of our shark activity on the inshore is during the middle of the day. But at Seal Island, the sharks are hunting during the dawn and dusk, but that's only during the winter months. So it's very dependent on sort of what area and the shark species and what they're doing. But it's normally because at dawn and dusk, that's when the sharks are feeding, but it's also when it's harder for you to see anything in the water. So you may not see that there's a lot of fish in the area or something like that. Cool.
So what's the long question? What's the plans of swimmers and if they
With the white flags, easy because we've got the siren, so generally people listen quite well, and if they don't listen, we keep setting off the siren until they do. With the red flag, we actually have found that people don't really listen to it at all. So the red flag is a warning flag. It doesn't mean that you have to get out of the water now. It means that there's an increased shark risk for the area. So we expect less people to go in the water, but actually we found there's just as many people in the water when there's a red flag. And then along False Bay, Shark Spotters operates on 7 beaches in False Bay and 1 on the Atlantic. But mostly the northern shore of False Bay is where there is the most shark activity.
Tomorrow's going to be our last day, and we're going to have Alison Towner from Cairnspy and myself talk to you more about the research on white sharks, what's happening with the population, what's all the debate around, some of the fine-scale movements, some of the larger-scale movements across southern Africa and into the Southwest Indian Ocean. So I hope to see you all back tomorrow. And have a great rest of the day. Thank you.